Hello, this is Cambria, your host of the AdVocation Nation podcast, a podcast dedicated to highlighting different advocacy voices and stories in hopes of inspiring others to become more involved in their communities. Please follow and subscribe to us on YouTube, SoundCloud, and Spotify to stay updated with new episodes and releases. In this episode, I have the honor of speaking with Malou Chávez, the Deputy Director at Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Malou is a graduate of UCLA, where she co-founded the organization Improving Dreams, Equality, Access, and Success Ideas, and participated in the Academic Advancement Program and the 2004 to 2005 Law Fellows Program. After receiving her Juris Doctorate from the Seattle University School of Law in 2010, she was named an Immigrant Justice Fellow at the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, where she currently serves as Deputy Director. Chávez is an immigration attorney helping the survivors of crime establish their lawful immigration status. It is an honor to have her here on the show. Thank you so much, Malou, for joining us. So to start us off, could you just tell us a little bit about your background and what eventually led you to do your work with Northwest Immigrants Rights Project?
I consider myself an advocate for immigrant rights. I'm a staff attorney. I also serve as Deputy Director at Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. And what led me to doing this work is likely my own experience as an immigrant. I definitely saw, just from lived experience, but also from meeting other people who immigrated and who were going through different hurdles as immigrants and accessing resources, that led to asking about lawful immigration status, definitely informed my desire to pursue a legal career. When I was a college student, I was really involved in creating access to higher education for high school students. And often the question for undocumented people, either their parents or the students themselves, would ask, but how do I go to college if I'm undocumented? Or how do I get documented? And so it was the question about gaining lawful status was always around in any work that I did as a college student and even as a high school student, just engaged in my community. And so gaining lawful immigration status was also the hope that I could learn how to answer that question. And so when I had the opportunity to sign up for a class that would help me with the LSAT to go to law school, I got to meet lawyers, and I was part of a program that would demystify the law school experience. And eventually, when I ended up getting accepted to law school, I knew from the beginning that being an immigrant rights advocate was going to be the route that I took. So when I first learned about Northwest Immigrant Rights Project in Washington State, I knew that I wanted to work at NIRP and stay at NIRP, and here I am.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I definitely have to say you've helped me and given me a lot of insight personally just on what law school looks like. And so I'm glad that, education has been very important to you, and especially moving forward. And so I was wondering if you could just also share a bit more about the work that you do with NIRP and what your role is there.
Yes, so you may know that Northwest Immigrant Rights Project was founded in 1984 as a response to the situation at the time. We were seeing a lot of Central American community members being placed in deportation proceedings, and there was a lot of turmoil happening in Central America. So people were fleeing violence and civil war and coming to the US. But as they were getting to Washington State in particular, they were facing deportation. And so it was a community in Washington State who mobilized and got together to create a resource for the Central American community facing deportation. And this was legal advocates, community members, faith-based community members, and just different people coming together. And so eventually it became a joint legal task force, and eventually it grew to be what is now known as Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. And the work evolved beyond removal defense, beyond working with asylum seekers, to now provide free legal services to people with low income or no income in Washington state. And we do this through providing direct legal services, either taking on the case. We work with people who are facing deportation proceedings, both in the detained context and in the non-detained context. We work with youth, adults, different forms of protection that they're seeking: asylum, family law, special immigrant juvenile status, naturalization, family-based petitions. There's just so much that we can help with now. But through our direct legal services, we also, which is one of our focus areas, we also learn what needs to change. And so our direct services inform our impact litigation and our systemic advocacy, which is our second focus area. And then our third focus area is our community education focus, which is not only for the impacted community, but also for service providers and other attorneys who seek to help the immigrant community and make sure that we are sharing correct information. And whenever there is any new practice or policy or law, that we are there to provide the correct information as things are evolving and constantly changing in the immigration practice.
Yes, it is so true. And so many things are changing right now, especially just in the past few weeks. Oh my goodness. And, the whole point of this podcast is really to help people understand a little bit more about advocacy and different efforts going on in the world around them. And I think that you really touched on the fact that it really is a community effort, and it takes really listening to the voices of others and coming together with other experts to really meet those goals. And so it's so great to hear about the work that NERP does. And just going back to basically, I guess, some of the educational work you do, what are some immigration issues that listeners should be paying attention to right now? Especially, I know there's been a lot going on, so if you could name just a few.
Yeah, thank you. I think that one, continued concern is the lack of representation in the immigration context. In the immigration context, there is no right to an attorney. So that continues to be an ongoing issue that we need to continue to address. And when a community member faces deportation, they are in front of a judge and they're presenting their case, defending themselves against an experienced prosecutor for the government who seeks to present a case for their deportation in front of a judge who most likely was an ICE attorney themselves. So it's that issue in particular, that there is no representation for people in the immigration context, unless you can afford one, or unless you are able to seek the services of an organization like NERP, where we provide free services, but that means that the demand is high. That's one issue. Another issue that's more present in our minds right now is the millions of youth and people who were or who could have benefited from the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Hundreds of thousands did eventually. I believe about 600 to 800,000 people benefited from Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA. And now with a recent decision out of Texas, people who have not held the DACA protection are now out, and they would not be able to have that protection, which is a protection from deportation, and have job or work authorization in order to get a gainful job. And so I think that that's on our minds right now. We continue to see some good changes for sure. And for example, our victims of crimes, people who have received U visas. This is not a good change, but right now U visas are limited to 10,000 visas a year. And something that is a good change is something that recently was introduced for people who have a pending U visa petition. And it's called the bona fide determination, where the people who are found to be bona fide eligible for a U visa are now going to be issued a work permit while their U visa is pending. And we know that U visas right now, because of that annual limit of 10,000 U visas per year, there is a wait of about 5 years or more. So this is a good change, because now it means that someone while they're waiting, could potentially have a work permit. And as you know, lawful status creates a ripple effect to accessing resources. But I think work authorization is the start of that. And with work authorization, that means that someone's livelihood for sure is impacted. They can get better jobs if they needed to. They can access other forms of resources. So those three things I wanted to also flag that we are seeing good changes. Of course, a lot of bad and hurtful and attacks happen in the last administration that needs to be undone. And that's going to take a long time. The changes that are happening are definitely not enough. We still need a pathway to citizenship for many of our community members, the millions of community members who are still on the margins and treated as second-class citizens.
Yeah, thank you so, so much for sharing all of that. And I think something that's really interesting to me is a lot of times we hear the rhetoric of, oh, why don't they just get in line or why don't they go through the right processes? But really just understanding that wait times are 5+ years for just U visas and so many more. And, DACA being overturned. Thank you so much for just sharing a bit more information about that. And I really hope that listeners can hear that and maybe do some more research too on, what different wait times look like, what it looks like to try and work in the US. That's a whole different process. And so I guess, what are some ways that you think people could, advocate or talk to their representatives or stand up for some of these issues that you're talking about, like DACA or any other, ongoing immigration issues?
Just a little bit to go back on the wait that you mentioned. You may know this already, but more than 60% of routes to getting lawful status in the US is through a family petition. And that means that you have to have a relative, either a US citizen or lawful permanent resident petitioner. And for some people, if the relationship doesn't exist, so for example, for a US citizen petitioner, they can petition for their spouse, their parent, their children, or siblings. For a lawful permanent resident petitioner, they can only petition for their spouse and unmarried children. So if you're not one of those really relatives or meet that relationship, then you can't immigrate through a family petition. For those people who can immigrate through an immediate family petition, the visa becomes readily available. For some people who are not immediate relatives, then they have to wait. And that's where that concept of waiting in line comes. So a visa becomes available for non-immediate relatives when the visa priority date becomes available. So someone who is a US citizen petitioner and their child is over 21, and the child who is not in the US yet, or even if they are, and let's say the child is from the Philippines, they have to wait many, many years because right now the priority date for an over 21 child who's a citizen of the Philippines is for people who were petitioned for back in March 2012. And now for an over 21 child of a US citizen who was petitioned, the priority date current right now is for people who were petitioned for back in January 1999. And so that's the wait list or the wait line that people are talking about. So can you imagine waiting over 20 years to reunite with your family member? Anyway, sorry, I got sidetracked, but I think that one way for sure is showing up. And it's very simple. We have in Washington State one of the biggest networks, the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, that a lot of our organizations and community members and coalitions are part of. So getting involved with groups like WISN, the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, learning about what's out there, getting correct information, getting to know the impact and the contributions of immigrants in the US, in Washington State in particular. If you're in Washington, it's very important. So showing up, understanding the process, getting correct information. I think that whenever there's a call to action, many of our partners, community partners, have calls to action or rallies or requests to contact our legislators. I think that showing up is very important. Obviously, if you have a skill, also contributing that skill. More than anything, I think that if there is a possibility for financial contributions, that is helpful. But I think more than anything, your solidarity, showing up and contributing your skills would go a long way, and it's very much appreciated.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really insightful. And there are definitely a lot of ways to, look into what efforts are going on in your community and how you can support those and stand in solidarity, like you're saying. And so this leads me to my next question. It's a bit more general, but what does advocacy mean to you, especially since you do work in the legal field with immigration?
For me, advocating means understanding first the needs, listening, always having community present, and being the voice of these struggles or issues that we would be working towards addressing. It also means that whatever skills or knowledge I have, that I share and I contribute as much as I can. It also means that I am not coming into this work as a savior. I am not coming in to say that I'm the only one that can do the advocacy or the work. I think that we need to work in collaboration. And advocacy, I think, really for me means that we have to acknowledge that someone's liberation or someone's access helps our liberation and our access. So it means that we should continue to advocate for each other and can't put our individual needs or individual wants ahead of the collective and the community.
That's really great. And especially as a lawyer being in that position of having certain, knowledge and skill sets, having that degree, but being able to really be someone who listens and walks alongside and, not having that intense power dynamic. And so this is more general advice, but what would you say is some practical advice for people looking to get more involved in advocacy or community efforts, regardless of if it's immigration or healthcare, whatever people might be interested in? What would you say that you've learned from your journey that people could maybe take if they're wanting to get more involved in their communities?
I think just paying attention to what you're hearing out there, what are in your neighborhood, with your neighbors, with your community center, with even your job and the needs of your colleagues. Just what are you hearing is something that they care about, that they may need more allyship around, or potentially finding something that would eventually become a passion to get involved in. And then joining a group, either through social media or now in the pandemic. I think it's a lot harder because we can't be in person, but showing up virtually to community meetings or hearing what's out there. I think that eventually that becomes something that is part of now your everyday life, to getting involved in whatever advocacy efforts those might be. Yeah, I think it goes back to showing up and eventually you finding your passion, where your skills could be used and where you can contribute.
That is such great insight. And just thank you so much for sharing all of this with us and really giving us some insight into what immigration looks like right now, ways that people can get more involved with their communities. And just to wrap us up, what are some ways that we can support you in the work that you do with NERP?
I definitely invite you to join our upcoming gala, actually. And let me get you that date. And it is going to be free. So anyone who potentially is interested in learning more about Northwest Immigrant Rights Project or even the work, our annual gala will be virtual and free on September 18th at 6 p.m. If you visit our website, nwirp.org, you will get information there. Our website also has resources. It includes events and news, press releases. You can learn more about the systemic advocacy we've done. While our organization is placed in Washington, located in Washington, the impact goes beyond the state boundaries. It is federal law after all, and any success that we have for the clients in Washington means that it might it would be success for people across the country. So learn about our work, learn more about who we are. Potentially, someone who may need help in contacting NERP might be something that you can suggest. So visit our website. There are lunch and learns that you can join. There are informational sessions that happen every now and then. If you join our listserv, you will be getting these updates. And we have a newsletter that goes out monthly informing of any new developments. Thank you.
Yeah, that is great. Thank you so much. And I will go ahead and put the links to your website down below, as well as the date for the annual gala. And just thank you so much, Malou, for taking the time to talk out of your crazy busy schedule and for all the support that you've given me and you're giving the immigration community. It's just so great to connect with you and hear the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Cambria. It's really amazing that you are doing this, and thank you for your time and getting this information out there. Thanks, Cambria.
Thank you.